Hi, I'm Matt Dixon with purplepatch Fitness here, and I'm joined by Dr. John Ball from Maximum Mobility. We're going to give you a little intro into the program that you're just about to see, focusing on recovery using the trigger point ball as well as the foam roller here, as well as some mobility exercises to really try and cure or help solve some of the traditional dysfunctions for triathletes. So John, just so that we understand and so that the athletes can understand how to do this correctly, how long should this program take?
Should take no more than 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay, 7 to 10 minutes, and what should it feel like? How hard should this be?
There will be some areas that are uncomfortable, but it definitely should not be painful while you're doing this.
Okay, so not too painful. And as we go through the program, both sides of the body, should we just focus on just the hot spots, or should this be a complete program we do every time?
Biggest mistake people make is focusing on the hot spots, so we want to make sure that we systematically go through the body and hit everything involved.
Okay, great. And at the end of this piece, we've got a little bit on mobility, so why don't you give us 10 seconds on what we're going to see here?
So there's 3 kind of common areas that mobility-wise triathletes break down, so we've given you 3 really good mobility drills to fix some of those most common dysfunctions that people have.
Okay, great. How many times a week should we do this?
2 to 3 times a week for the mobility stuff, and if you can roll 3 to 5 times a week, it'd be great.
All right, great. So let's get into it and let's see what John has to say.
Because we want to do the foam rolling process the same way every single time to make sure that we hit all the regions involved, we want to start with the same process. We're going to start with the foot and then work our way up the body progressively, segment by segment. So Terrence has a lacrosse ball that he's using, but you can use a trigger point ball, a softball, tennis ball works as well. The big part with this is that foam rolling will sometimes be uncomfortable. It should not be painful, out and out painful. If it is out and out painful, we're probably past the point where you're not going to be productive at all with the foam rolling. He's got the ball on the bottom of the foot. He's looking and just kind of scanning the region for any areas that are a little more tender than the rest. When he finds one, he's just going to sink into that spot a little bit. And again, we're going to ease into it. And you're not going to fix anything necessarily with foam rolling, so going after it really aggressively is not going to be productive at all. We're going to do 2 regions in the calf. We kind of have this broken up so that we make sure we get the whole of the regions that are important. He's going to start lower on the calf, more in the region of the soleus. That leg crossed over the top, just rolling through the same thing. He's going to roll into the inside and also onto the outside of the soleus region. And through most of these body parts, we want to make sure that we don't just hit the center of it, we also roll side to side a little bit so that we can hit the whole of the muscle bellies. Okay, so once he's moved through that region, we're going to move up about 6 inches right into the belly of the calf muscle. He's going to keep his foot plantar flexed, like pointed away from his body, so that but keep it relaxed during that process so that he can actually sink through a lot of the superficial tissues and get into some of the deeper calf structures. He's got his right leg crossed on top, so he can add a little bit of extra push with his hamstring on the right side without having to support all of his weight on his body with his hands. So when he's doing these right now, he's got his left leg, he's treating the left leg, he's got the right leg crossed on top, and if he pulls down with the right leg a little bit, keeping the left leg relaxed, he can get a little bit more pressure, sink a little bit farther into those structures. And now you can get a little bit more into the deep posterior compartment musculature, which is where a lot of people will have trouble with shin splints. Okay, once we're done with the calf, we're going to move onto the anterior part of the shin. And this is one of the areas that's missed on a regular basis. This is vitally important that you get this done. Just use his body weight with his hands supporting his body weight, and you can control the amount that he gets on there. And we want to make sure that you get into the soft tissues, the muscular component of the anterior shin, and you're not rolling directly on top of the tibia. And again, during this process, we're doing both sides, so it'll look right foot, right lower calf, left lower calf, right calf, left calf, moving up the chain. It's going to transition directly into the quad musculature from there, making sure to hit the center portion of the quad. And when you roll onto the lateralis, hitting as much of the quad, the inside and the outside portion, so he's going to roll both directions. And this is a really, really key point here. When he gets to the outside quad portion, he's not going to roll on the IT band portion down in the neighborhood of the knee. You'll see this on a lot of videos and a lot of places on the internet, but when you have trouble on the outside of the knee, what generally happens is the tissues on the outside of the knee become inflamed. And what we don't want to do is take tissue that's already irritated, already mad at us, and start poking on it directly. So he's not going to go past about the mid-thigh region on the outside of the knee. From here, he's going to flip his body over, roll back onto the hamstring musculature. Same rule applies. He's going to hit the belly of the muscles as much as he can. He's going to roll onto the inside and outside portions. And the hamstring is really a tough area to get because you're taking a pretty blunted object and trying to roll into very specific tissues, so we usually follow this with a more specific hamstring work. Terrence is going to roll straight down from there into the glute structures, again hitting both sides. When we're in the glute region, we want to make sure that we get the glute max itself, and then we also want to make sure that we get these deep structures in the glute and the hip that are stabilization musculature primarily. So he's crossed his leg over, which allows him to get into like the piriformis and the gemelli and some of the deeper structures. And a key point here, he's going to roll all the way down. There's a bone on the outside of the pelvis, and he's going to roll all the way into this little fossa that kind of sits there underneath the shelf of that bone to make sure that we get the glute medius and some of the smaller stabilization musculature for the hip. So especially when we get into this area of the body, there are going to be some areas that are tender, that are a little bit sore. They should be tender and sore. They should not be painful when we're rolling. And especially when we get into the quad that we did just a second ago. When you get into those lateral quad structures, the muscle belly of the quad just isn't that thick, and the femur, the bone, sits literally just an inch or so underneath the belly of the muscle. So you're taking a muscle and compressing it against the bone. It's going to be sore to some degree. What we don't want to do is just mash on that tissue so much, thinking that we're going to roll through it and make it non-tender eventually. We're just actually going to probably propagate the situation. So after the external rotators and the deep glute structures, he's going to roll into the adductor region. And again, this is another one of those real meaty regions that's a little harder to work, so we usually follow this with more specific stuff in a seated position. He's going to hit both sides. This area will generally be a little bit more tender. And again, a little bit goes a long way, and it's not usually going to fix something with foam rolling. What we're trying to do is maintain tissue quality, not necessarily try to restore tissue quality. We'll transition from the adductor region into the low back. He'll get up, he'll sit on top of the roller, cross his arms on his shoulders, roll down until the roller's in the small of his low back, and start rolling from there. And he wants to make sure that we turn side to side a little bit so that we're not rolling directly on top of the spine. And we're getting the musculature in the region. So in this region of the back, especially with swimmers, the lat muscle actually comes down and crosses in the lumbar spine. So by raising his arm here, he can actually lengthen the lat a little bit. So he rolls directly from the low back into the mid back, another region that gets missed quite often. Again, same rules apply. He'll have to shift his body a little bit to the right or to the left to get into the musculature in the region. And then he'll transition directly from the mid-back region into the shoulders. Regions in the shoulder, that'll be, again, another area that's a little bit tender on a lot of people. He's got his body weight on his hips, and he's controlling how much he actually puts into the shoulder. There's usually a region in the back side of the shoulder and the region of the rotator cuff, which is a huge stabilization musculature during swimming, where you're normally going to have some trigger points, some really tender areas. We want to make sure that we get those. Especially in the shoulder, it's really quite common for people to have anterior shoulder pain that comes from the posterior shoulder mechanics being off. So we want to make sure we spend enough time on the back side of the shoulder. A lot of times people don't know that they're sore here until they start rolling. So the process is foot, lower calf, calf, anterior shin, quad, hamstrings, glute, adductor, low back, mid back, shoulders. And we're done. Should take no more than 7 to 10 minutes max. If we're spending more time on it than that, we're probably late to the party trying to fix tissue that's already broken. Okay, so the foot and ankle complex takes so much pounding during the running portion of triathlon training that we often get really stiff and restricted range of motion in your ankle, and that will transfer all the way up the chain. So this is a really quick check. A lot of you will have this, and even if you don't, it's still a really good drill just to maintain the range of motion gains that you have. We're gonna start with checking your right ankle range of motion by keeping your heel on the ground and pushing your knee over your toes, moving away from the wall as far as we can until you can no longer keep your heel on the ground. That just gives us a good baseline idea of how well your right ankle is moving. Then we're gonna put both feet back together and you're gonna switch legs, and then we're gonna do the same thing on the left side. We should see about the same range of motion side to side. And what we're gonna do is, if we do find that one ankle has a little bit of a range of motion restriction, we're gonna go through the drill. And it's just as simple as this. You're gonna stay in that same range of motion, that same position, and then you're gonna lift your toes, point them up towards the sky. While you're doing that, you're gonna start to push your knee directly over your toes. And really important with this part is we're gonna hold the toes up as long as we can as we push our knee over the toes. You'll get to a certain range of motion and you'll start to feel the toes start to fall down or be forced down, and you should get a burning in the anterior portion of the lower leg. That's one rep. Once the toes start to fall down, that rep is over. We're gonna go back, we're gonna back off again, and we'll do the same thing again, moving back through that range of motion, holding the toes up until they start to fall down. That's rep number 2. We're gonna do somewhere between 7 and 10 reps, and then when we do mobility stuff, we always wanna post-check. We wanna make sure that we made the changes that we want to occur. So you're gonna leave your foot in that same position, and then you're gonna simply take your knee, push it over your toes again. We should see an increase in your range of motion if we've been effective. So you're gonna keep your heel on the ground, and you're gonna push your knee over your toes, trying to touch the wall with your knee. You're gonna move back from the wall as far as you can. Then we're gonna put the other foot right next to that one so we can compare side to side. You're gonna do the same motion. Whichever foot has the range of motion restriction, we're gonna go back through and do the drill. We're gonna hold the toes up, push your knee over your toes as long as you can until they start to drop. We'll do 10 of those reps and then recheck. A real quick check for hip mobility and function. We're just gonna lie on our back, grab a knee, pull it into your chest, and just feel for how far that goes. We're gonna compare that to the other side. We'll often see one side stops quite a bit earlier or gives you some pressure in the anterior part of the hip. That's the indication that we're going to need to do the hip mobility drill. We're going to take a rope or a seat belt or a strap, whatever you got available at home. You're going to anchor it on one foot. It's going to slide into the anterior hip compartment on the involved side. You're going to grab that same knee, pull it into your chest, hold for 2 seconds, back off. We'll do 10 of those. And again, most important part, we want to make sure we make the changes so we post-check.